What if I told you that one of cinema's greatest war films nearly became a real-life casualty of war? That the making of Apocalypse Now was so chaotic, so dangerous, and so completely insane that it makes the Vietnam War depicted on screen look like a peaceful vacation? Behind the iconic scenes and unforgettable performances lies a production history so twisted and traumatic that it nearly destroyed everyone involved. The 24 secrets I'm about to reveal will change how you see this masterpiece forever, because sometimes the real story is far more shocking than anything Hollywood could ever imagine. From real heart attacks caught on camera to actual dead bodies used as props, this is the untold story of a film that became its own horror movie. Martin Sheen stumbled into his hotel room, sweat pouring down his face, his heart pounding like machine gun fire. What happened next would become one of cinema's most authentic moments, but it nearly cost him his life. During the famous mirror-punching scene that opens the film, Sheen wasn't acting. He was having a genuine, life-threatening heart attack. The raw anguish you see on screen, the way he clutches his chest and collapses, that's a real medical emergency captured on camera. Francis Ford Coppola made the split-second decision to keep filming as paramedics rushed to the scene. The director later admitted he thought about whether to prioritize the shot or Sheen's life, a decision that haunts him to this day. When Sheen smashes the mirror and blood streams down his hand, that's his actual blood from the glass shards. The actor was so deep in character and so physically compromised that he couldn't distinguish between his heart attack symptoms and his character's emotional breakdown. This scene, now considered one of the most powerful openings in film history, was literally a man fighting for his life while cameras rolled. The medical team had to wait until Coppola called cut to fully treat Sheen, who spent the next several days in a Philippine hospital wondering if his career was over. But Sheen's health crisis was nothing compared to the absolute chaos that Marlon Brando brought to the production. When the legendary actor stepped off the plane in the Philippines, crew members couldn't believe their eyes. Brando had ballooned to over 300 pounds, looking nothing like the lean, intimidating Colonel Kurtz that Coppola had envisioned. Even worse, Brando admitted he hadn't read Heart of Darkness, the source material, or even looked at the script. The man who had revolutionized acting with his performances in The Godfather and A Streetcar Named Desire had apparently lost all professional discipline. Every single day of filming with Brando became an exercise in creative problem-solving and pure frustration. The actor would demand complete rewrites of scenes just hours before shooting, often changing fundamental plot points on a whim. Brando refused to memorize any dialogue, instead having assistants hold cue cards just off camera. His unprofessional behavior reached such extremes that he would show up to set in completely wrong costumes, forcing last-minute wardrobe changes that cost thousands of dollars. Coppola had to completely reimagine how to film Kurtz, using shadows and strategic camera angles to hide Brando's massive weight gain. The famous scenes of Kurtz emerging from darkness weren't artistic choices. They were desperate attempts to make an obese actor look menacing. Brando's daily rate was so astronomical that every wasted day due to his unprofessionalism cost the production a fortune, money that Coppola didn't have. Speaking of money Coppola didn't have, the film's budget became a nightmare that nearly destroyed him financially and professionally. What started as a modest $12 million project exploded into a $31 million monster that threatened to bankrupt everyone involved. In today's money, that would be equivalent to spending over $140 million on a film that was supposed to cost $55 million. Coppola had to mortgage his house, his vineyard, and every asset he owned to keep the cameras rolling. The director was so desperate for funding that he considered selling the rights to The Godfather just to finish Apocalypse Now. Studio executives were calling daily, threatening to shut down production and sue Coppola for the massive overruns. The financial pressure was so intense that Coppola developed severe anxiety and couldn't sleep for weeks at a time. Every single day of filming cost approximately $100,000, a staggering amount for the 1970s, and the money was disappearing faster than anyone could track. Equipment rentals, actor salaries, and location fees in the Philippines were bleeding the production dry. Coppola's wife, Eleanor, later revealed that they came within hours of losing everything they owned, saved only by emergency funding from United Artists. The director was so financially stretched that he couldn't afford to reshoot crucial scenes, meaning many problems had to be fixed in post-production at enormous additional cost. The financial stress was compounded by the fact that they were literally filming in an active war zone. The Philippine Air Force had generously provided helicopters for the famous attack sequences, but these weren't Hollywood props. They were real military aircraft engaged in actual combat operations against communist rebels. Multiple times during filming, the helicopters had to abandon the movie set to fight genuine battles, leaving Coppola and his crew stranded in remote jungle locations. The most surreal moment came when they were filming the Dulung Bridge sequence, which required the appearance of an active combat zone. As cameras rolled, real government forces and rebel fighters began shooting at each other just outside the frame. The explosions and gunfire you hear in that scene aren't all special effects. Some of it is actual warfare happening yards away from the actors. Crew members later admitted they couldn't tell the difference between scripted explosions and real combat, creating a terrifying confusion that left everyone on edge. Local military commanders would often commandeer equipment and personnel without warning, sometimes in the middle of crucial shots. Just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, Mother Nature decided to wage her own war against the production. A massive typhoon swept through the Philippines, destroying elaborate and expensive sets that had taken months to construct. The storm was so powerful that it lifted entire buildings off their foundations and scattered them across the jungle like toys. Millions of dollars worth of equipment, including irreplaceable cameras and sound recording devices, were destroyed in a single night. The typhoon forced a complete shutdown of production for several months while sets were rebuilt from scratch, further exploding the already astronomical budget. Weather delays meant that the film, originally scheduled to wrap in 16 weeks, stretched into a grueling 238-day ordeal that tested everyone's sanity. The constant humidity and tropical conditions caused equipment failures almost daily, with cameras malfunctioning and film stock degrading in the heat. Crew members developed tropical diseases, including malaria and dysentery, which further slowed progress. The weather became such a constant enemy that Coppola later said he felt like he was fighting 3 wars simultaneously: the scripted Vietnam War, the actual Philippine Civil War, and a meteorological war against nature itself. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the production was how reality and fiction became dangerously blurred. Local prop suppliers, eager to please the American filmmakers, went to shocking lengths to provide authentic decorations for Kurtz's compound. What the crew discovered was that some of the bodies used as props weren't fake at all. They were real corpses that had been illegally obtained from morgues and burial sites. When this horrifying truth was revealed, it created a moral crisis among cast and crew members who realized they had been working alongside actual dead bodies for weeks. Producer Gray Fredrickson found the bodies in the prop tent and, after a confrontation with the supplier and the ensuing police involvement, the bodies were confiscated and replaced with extras for the final movie. The water buffalo sacrifice scene that closes the film used a real animal that was killed according to local religious traditions, but the graphic nature of the actual slaughter proved too intense for many crew members to witness. The psychological pressure on Francis Ford Coppola himself became so intense that he suffered a complete nervous breakdown during production. The director lost over 100 pounds from stress and barely slept for months, surviving on a combination of adrenaline, coffee, and sheer willpower. Coppola became convinced that the film was cursed and would destroy his career, leading to thoughts of self-harm that terrified his family and crew. His wife Eleanor documented the director's psychological deterioration in her behind-the-scenes footage, which later became the acclaimed documentary Hearts of Darkness. Coppola's mental state became so fragile that he would have emotional outbursts in front of the entire crew, sometimes breaking down in tears or flying into violent rages. The director's breakdown affected everyone on set, creating an atmosphere of tension and uncertainty that permeated every aspect of the production. Eleanor Coppola's decision to keep filming during her husband's crisis provided an unprecedented glimpse into the cost of artistic ambition, but it also raised ethical questions about exploiting personal suffering for documentary purposes. The film's technical challenges were equally overwhelming, with sound design alone taking over a year to complete due to the unprecedented complexity of the audio landscape. Walter Murch, the sound designer, had to create an immersive Vietnam War soundscape using revolutionary techniques that had never been attempted before. The famous helicopter attack sequence required synchronizing dozens of separate audio elements, from rotor blade sounds to Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries to explosive sound effects. Recording equipment frequently malfunctioned in the tropical humidity, forcing the sound team to develop new weatherproofing techniques in the field. Many crucial dialogue scenes had to be completely re-recorded in post-production because the original audio was unusable due to weather interference and equipment failures. The complexity of the sound design pushed technology to its limits, requiring custom-built equipment and innovative techniques that later became industry standards. Murch worked 18-hour days for months, meticulously layering audio elements to create the film's distinctive soundscape. The sound mixing process was so complex that it required multiple specialized facilities and cost nearly as much as some entire films. Some sequences had over 100 separate audio tracks that had to be perfectly balanced and synchronized. Robert Duvall's iconic "I love the smell of napalm in the morning" speech was completely improvised, capturing one of cinema's most memorable moments through spontaneous creativity. Duvall had prepared different dialogue for the scene, but when cameras rolled, he channeled his character's military mindset and delivered the unforgettable monologue about the smell of napalm and surfing conditions. The speech perfectly encapsulated the surreal disconnect between warfare and normalcy that defined the American experience in Vietnam. Coppola immediately recognized that Duvall's improvisation was superior to the scripted dialogue and built the entire sequence around that spontaneous moment. The actor later revealed that he drew inspiration from real military personnel he had met during research, particularly their ability to find beauty in destructive situations. This improvised dialogue became so iconic that it influenced countless other war films and became a cultural touchstone for discussions about the psychology of combat. The scene's power came from Duvall's ability to make the character's twisted worldview seem both horrifying and oddly poetic. The challenges extended to basic logistics, with local extras often showing up drunk or not at all, creating constant delays and continuity problems. Filipino actors and extras had different cultural attitudes toward punctuality and professional behavior, leading to frequent miscommunications and scheduling conflicts. Language barriers made it nearly impossible to give complex directions, especially during action sequences that required precise timing and coordination. Many extras had never worked on a film before and didn't understand basic safety protocols, creating dangerous situations during explosive sequences. The production had to hire local translators and cultural liaisons, but even they struggled to bridge the gap between Hollywood expectations and local customs. Some days, hundreds of extras would simply not show up, forcing complete rewrites of scenes that had been planned for months. The cultural clash between American filmmaking methods and Filipino work culture created tension that affected every aspect of production. Crew members had to constantly adapt their techniques to accommodate local conditions and customs they didn't fully understand. Coppola's perfectionism led to an unprecedented amount of footage being shot, with over 1 million feet of film exposed during production. To put this in perspective, a typical 2-hour film uses approximately 11,000 feet of film, meaning Coppola shot nearly 100 times the amount needed for the final product. This excessive shooting ratio reflected the director's uncertainty about the story and his compulsive need to capture every possible variation of each scene. The massive amount of footage created enormous costs in film stock, processing, and storage, contributing significantly to the budget overruns. Editors later spent years sorting through the material, trying to construct a coherent narrative from the overwhelming amount of choices. Some sequences were shot dozens of times with different approaches, creating an editor's nightmare of continuity and pacing challenges. The excess footage led to multiple different cuts of the film, as Coppola couldn't decide which version best captured his vision. This shooting approach was revolutionary for its time, but incredibly wasteful and expensive, setting a precedent for obsessive filmmaking that few productions could afford to emulate. The famous napalm attack sequence required dangerous special effects that pushed safety boundaries and created spectacular but hazardous conditions. Gasoline bombs were used to create the massive fireballs that dominate the scene, generating intense heat and toxic fumes that affected the cast and crew. Helicopter pilots had to fly through smoke and flames while maintaining precise formations, creating genuinely dangerous conditions that required exceptional skill and courage. The explosions were so large and unpredictable that several takes had to be abandoned when flames spread beyond controlled areas. Crew members suffered burns and smoke inhalation during the filming of the sequence, raising serious questions about the risks taken for cinematic effect. The Philippine Air Force pilots who flew the helicopters were essentially performing combat maneuvers in a controlled environment, but the margin for error was extremely small. Environmental concerns were largely ignored, as the massive explosions and fires had a significant impact on the local ecosystem. The sequence required weeks of preparation and multiple camera positions to capture safely, but even with extensive planning, the risks remained substantial. Perhaps most shocking of all, Coppola considered the entire production cursed, and genuinely believed it might end his career and possibly his life. The director became obsessed with the idea that the film was somehow cursed, pointing to the seemingly endless series of disasters, health crises, and financial problems that plagued every aspect of production. Coppola consulted with local spiritual advisors and even considered abandoning the project entirely on multiple occasions. The psychological weight of the curse affected decision-making throughout the production, as the director became increasingly superstitious and erratic. Cast and crew members began to share Coppola's belief that the production was somehow doomed, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of anxiety and negative expectations. The director's conviction that the film was cursed became a self-fulfilling prophecy, as his increasingly desperate decisions led to more problems and setbacks. Some crew members quit rather than continue working on what they perceived as a doomed project, further complicating an already difficult situation. The curse narrative became so powerful that it overshadowed the actual filmmaking process, turning the production into a psychological thriller for everyone involved. These 24 secrets reveal that Apocalypse Now wasn't just a war movie, it was a war in itself, fought in the jungles of the Philippines with casualties both seen and unseen. The film that emerged from this chaos became a masterpiece precisely because of the genuine madness that went into its creation. Every frame of the final product carries the weight of real suffering, authentic breakdown, and the thin line between artistic vision and complete self-destruction. The irony is that a film about the horrors of war became its own horror story, with the cast and crew experiencing trauma that rivaled anything depicted on screen. When you watch Apocalypse Now today, you're not just seeing a story about the Vietnam War, you're witnessing the documentary evidence of filmmakers who pushed themselves beyond the breaking point and somehow managed to create art from their own apocalypse. The real horror wasn't what they depicted on screen, but what they lived through to bring that vision to life.